but we didn't get any, thankfully.
Oh, we're live. I see that we're live. Hello, hello. Uh, Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tom, and my guest today. I'm so happy to have my friend Dr. Brian Mowell with us today. Dr. Brian, nice to see you.
Tom, Dr. Tom, likewise, really excited to be here. Such an important topic and really excited to get started.
Yeah, so as a way of introduction for everyone, Dr. Brian's a good friend, and he is the go-to guy in the world, in my opinion, when you want to deal with the threat or the reality of diabetes and what do you do about it. That as I've dialed down on autoimmunity and on wheat and gluten sensitivities, and most people know that if they ask me a question in that arena, I've got a pretty good repertoire of science behind me to answer that question. Dr. Brian is the go-to guy for diabetes, which happens to be the #1 threat worldwide in terms of health of our societies, is the overweight, obesity, and the ensuing diabetes that comes with that. So with all of that introduction, Dr. Brian, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you again, Dr. Tom. And you're absolutely right. And there's a very important connection between all of the things that you mentioned, and that's inflammation. And inflammation is at the root of insulin resistance, which is really the root cause of diabetes, pre-diabetes.
Let's dial that down right away, because the whole world is like, what the heck was that? You know, so I mean, and I think it's such a critically important concept for people to understand. What is insulin resistance?
All right, very good. So insulin, first of all, let's talk about what that is. Insulin is a hormone. It's a peptide hormone that enables us. It's actually the chief anabolic hormone in the body. Its job is to store extra fuel, extra energy, when we have extra fuel on board. And it typically does that in the form of fat, but it takes extra sugar, protein in the form of amino acids, and fat in the form of fatty acids, and it stores them away. So when we eat a meal, we take in all this food, we break it down into its component parts, which is basically sugar, fat, and protein, and then that breaks down into different sugars like glucose and different amino acids and different fatty acids. Then we have to use that stuff, and it's insulin that puts it in the cell to be converted to energy, which really drives our system. So insulin's a very important hormone. We need it. Without it, we die very quickly. And
let me see if I can summarize that.
Sure.
I lost you on anabolic.
Okay.
You know, way back. And so some people have already written in. Monica, ciao Monica from Italy. Thank you so much for joining us again. And Linda in Rochester, Minnesota, Vasco in Chicago, Teresa in Chicago, Ruth in Portland. Thank you, Carolyn in South Carolina. Thank you all so much. And there are many more, and I'll get to who I can with that in a minute. The way I think about insulin, if I may.
Yes, please.
Please tell me if I'm wrong in this kind of a explanation. Sugar is a primary energy for almost, if not all, of our cells in our body. Mm-hmm. And insulin is the escort that carries sugar into the cell.
Right.
And so that when you've got insulin resistance, it means the insulin's not working. That's right. That the body is resistant for some reason in letting that insulin to work. And when that happens, your blood sugar level goes up because the sugar's not being escorted into the cells. And so it's hanging out on the highway. Your bloodstream is just a highway, right? So the sugar's on the highway and the sugar level goes up. And when you have high sugar level, there are some cells that are more sensitive. They don't need the insulin as much to use that sugar, like your eyes or the small blood vessels down in your legs. And that's why amputations and blindness are so common with diabetes, because that sugar that's in the bloodstream, that stays in the bloodstream because we're insulin resistant, that sugar can cause damage to some of our cells.
We only have 1 teaspoon of sugar, glucose, floating around in our entire pool of blood at any given time, about 4 grams. So we're very susceptible to fluctuations in sugar. And when that hormone, as you said, that carrier to escort glucose into our cells to be burned for energy and fuel isn't working right, our blood sugar can go up very quickly and cause a whole lot of problems.
So a target that people could work on is insulin resistance.
That's exactly right.
If they can reduce the insulin resistance, so insulin can work better, it would help us to have stabler blood sugar levels.
Yes, and in fact, I always like to say this. I'd like to make this big point towards the beginning of a presentation to people who aren't necessarily here with diabetes, because there are some people I'm sure listening who have diabetes or who will hear this who have diabetes, but most do not. Insulin resistance is way bigger than diabetes. First of all, about half of all Americans right now have either diabetes, pre-diabetes, or a metabolic syndrome issue that is associated with insulin resistance. So we're talking about half the population.
Half the population. That means
Yes.
On the list of people that say hello, Vasco may not, but then Aaron does. Aaron in Hawaii does.
Mm-hmm.
Christy in Dallas may not, but then Annette in Cape Town, South Africa does. So 1 out of every 2 people about have a problem. That's why this is such a great topic to talk about. Oh, there's my wife saying hello. Hi, honey. Hi. My wife's in Switzerland right now. Brian, there's Marzi, Brian.
Hi, Marzi.
And also a special shout out to Penelope, who is with my wife in Switzerland right now. Hello, Penelope. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's 1 o'clock in the morning there. And I think it's later than that in Cape Town, South Africa, I think. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining. So this concept of if I can reduce my insulin resistance so that the insulin I'm making can work better, then I won't need as much sugar. Sugar will be used more efficiently, and I won't have as many cravings as I might now. And so that less cravings, less taking in of sugar. And I'm not just talking about candy bars. Sugar can hide in eating big bowls of rice, in carbohydrates, that people love carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are sugars. Brian, Dr. Brian, is that kind of logic rational, that if we focus on insulin sensitivity, making our insulin using tissues, the receptors, more sensitive, so there's less resistance, then our blood sugars can stay more stable? Is that rational?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And not only that, well, first of all, I completely agree with you. One of the most common signs of insulin resistance or symptoms is cravings for carbohydrates or sugar, particularly after meals. So if you eat and then you notice an hour later, you're craving some sugar or craving something else that's carbohydrate related, that's a good sign that you have insulin resistance. Not only will it help you break those cravings by improving your insulin sensitivity, though, it'll help you lose weight, particularly around the organs, which is that important fat that is associated with cardiovascular disease and many other things. It'll help protect your heart. Not only diabetes, but high insulin and insulin resistance is independently associated with cardiovascular disease. So it'll protect your heart and blood vessels. Same thing with the kidneys. Yes, it's associated with diabetes, but you don't have to have diabetes. Insulin resistance alone is independently associated with kidney failure and kidney disease, among other things, and the brain, which is so important. I know that's one of the things we're going to talk about today.
Yes,
Insulin resistance is intimately connected with brain problems, cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, and other neurodegenerative diseases. So you're going to protect your brain health as well.
We actually came up with a term, scientists came up with a term a number of years ago called diabetes type 3. And diabetes type 3 is when it affects your brain and you develop symptoms that look like Alzheimer's. You can't think very clearly. It keeps getting worse and worse. And it's because of the insulin resistance for many years, causing so much inflammation and damage. That's a trigger. So Laura Bender wrote something really cute. She said, I actually thought to myself, I don't have diabetes. Maybe I shouldn't bother watching. I decided any information from Dr. Tom was worth the time for my health. Well, thanks, Laura. That's really nice of you to hang around long enough to say, oh, this is an important topic. So thank you for that. Way to go. Hello to Heather in Jacksonville, Florida, Gary in Riverview, Florida. Heather Lawrence has a question on what health it talks about how meat causes insulin resistance and diabetes. Let's take that question. I've not heard that association before, but Dr. Brian, you're the expert. Can meat cause insulin resistance and lead to diabetes?
You know, there's a big push from the plant-based community right now to make the case that fat in the diet, particularly saturated fats, cause insulin resistance, which leads to type 2 diabetes and other problems. And like most things, there is a lining of truth, but really it's not entirely true. So if we think about meat, and let's say it's an average cut of meat with some fat in it as well, not a super lean cut of meat. You know, there are quite a bit of saturated fats. Hopefully you're doing grass-fed organic, and there's more omega-3 concentration and so forth, and it's a better cut. But any meat, and this is true for really any animal protein, is going to have some fat with it, and it's going to have a portion that's going to be saturated fat. So the confusion comes in because it is true that elevated free fatty acids, that's the sort of the elemental basic components of fat, elevated levels of fat associated in the blood are associated with insulin resistance. Also, fat in the liver. So a fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as well as fat in the muscle tissue, is also associated with insulin resistance. The problem comes in when you look at how that fat got there in the first place. So the plant-based community is going to say, well, it's from eating fat. And in fact, many people in our government and conventional wisdom says the same thing. But the research does not prove that out. In fact, the research indicates that a lot of that fat comes from two things. Number one, it comes from processed carbohydrate foods in our diet, things like flour and refined white sugar, sugary soft drinks, and packaged foods. Also trans fats, hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated fats, and processed refined vegetable oils that a lot of people consume. If you look at the development of diabetes and obesity, really since the 1950s, we had a spike when we started using more vegetable oils and more refined sugar, and we had another spike right after the food guide pyramid was released in the early 1990s, when people really started to adopt those recommendations and started to cut down on natural products like butter and a lot of these natural animal products, and started substituting these fake fats, these fake vegetable fats. So that's what a lot of the research is showing now is leading to that fat in the liver, in the muscle, and in the bloodstream, especially when combined with a high carbohydrate diet. The worst combination you can eat is moderate to high carbohydrate, especially refined, processed, packaged foods, and fat, especially these fake fats. If you do moderate to high fat and moderate to high carbohydrate, which is the standard American diet, that is a recipe for disaster. And that disaster is diabetes and insulin resistance.
Let me focus on one thing you said. Everything you said was really important, but that's a lot for everybody to take in. By the way, everyone, we're going to put a transcript of this episode up for you. It's such an important topic that we'll transcribe it so you can download the transcript. Just go to thedoctor.com/ask, ASK. Just ask. thedoctor.com/ask, and give us a couple of hours, mate. Give us a day. Give us a day just to be safe for my staff, because it's going to be late for them. They're in New York now, some of them, and we'll have the transcript for you there tomorrow so you can read the whole thing. Because there was one person, let's see, Kim Watson said, I'm late to this. I can rewatch it, but what exactly is insulin resistance? Kim, you'll have to come back to get that. We went through it already, and I'm glad that you'll rewatch or get the transcript. But then you ask, how do I test for it? So I want to make sure we touch on that one. We will touch on that one. How do I test for it? But one of the things you said that in the midst of all of that information that was really important information, one point though is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, sugars. Carbohydrates are sugars. I get too excited, I hit the desk, and the whole thing's carbohydrates are sugars. When you eat too much sugar, what does your body do with it? Your liver converts it to fat. You get more fat by eating more carbohydrates. Doesn't matter if it's candy bars or sugar in your coffee or pasta or bread or gluten-free bread. It doesn't matter. The more carbohydrates you eat, when you cross a threshold of carbohydrates, and everyone's threshold is different, when you cross the threshold where your body can't use those carbohydrates for sugar anymore because you got too much sugar, your body converts it to fat. And it's those fats, and they're not good fats. Those fats are the fats that get laid onto your midsection. You get a GM spare tire around the center of your waist, and that fat produces 17 hormones. 15 of them are inflammatory. They cause inflammation. And you all know by now, inflammation is the enemy, the number one enemy, as Dr. Bryan started off this session with. So the more carbohydrates you eat, the more, when you cross the line, the more fat you get. And the more fat you get, the more inflammation you get. And the more inflammation you get, the more you're singing the blues. One way or another, you're just singing the blues. And when I sing the blues, my wife says, please, don't sing. Your voice is not that good, right? So I can't do that too often. So, but I want to make sure people understand that, yeah, fats will increase your fat level, but carbohydrates in our culture, it's more of a threat than eating too much fat.
Especially in the presence of high insulin levels. So we talked about inflammation. So inflammation, there's research showing that really is the root cause of insulin resistance in the periphery. So the muscles, we have this inflammatory process which actually causes insulin resistance in the muscles. That then leads to elevated insulin. So when you're resistant, the body makes more. So our insulin levels go up.
Well, let's stop there.
Sure.
There. So when you have insulin resistance, your body says, I'm not getting enough sugar in my cells. So there's plenty of insulin in the bloodstream, but the body is telling the brain, I'm not getting enough fuel. I'm not getting enough fuel.
That's right.
So the body sends a message to the pancreas, make more insulin. So your insulin level keeps going up. So you get more fat. And it's because of the insulin resistance that's happening. And for so many people, it's because of the excess number of carbohydrates that they're eating.
Right.
Our friend, Dr. Peter Osborne, that's a big reason why he's a no-grain guy, is to get the number of carbohydrates down that people are eating. And the plant-based movement is right on the money, that the more vegetables, the more plants you eat, the less carbohydrates you're eating. And so the less of this whole syndrome that we're talking about comes into play. I'm not that much of a vegetarian-based person myself. If someone wants to be vegetarian, it's great. That's fine, but it's hard to do. So you really have to work at it to do it right. So I personally think a little meat once in a while for most people is good. If you're a blood type O, a little meat more often, your body is more designed to handle meats more often. And as you said, Dr. Bryan, grass-fed, organic, always, not whenever possible, always. If you've got an option, it's always organic. If it's a pain in the butt to get the organic, but you've got the option, do it. There's so many reasons why it's in your favor to do that.
And when you cut the carbs and start focusing on whole foods like lots and lots of fibrous vegetables and good, clean quality proteins and healthy fat, your insulin levels drop. And research is very clear on that. Insulin levels drop. And when the insulin levels drop, then you can start burning fat. You start burning fat that's in your diet, and then you start turning to your fat stores, both in your subcutaneous fat that you carry around your kind of your belt line, as well as that all important visceral fat that's packed in around the organs. You start burning through that fat, and that's how you reverse diabetes and insulin resistance.
Right. Well, let's roll on over to the brain for a while here. This is supposed to be about the brain, and I will say one thing, that this whole concept about shameless plug is in this book, The Autoimmune Fix, and you can get it in at Amazon or at our website, thedoctor.com. You also can get it in German. You can get it in Polish, which I don't have to point to you. You can get it in Portuguese. You can get it in, there's one more country I'm not remembering.
You had to do Polish, right? Of course.
I had to do Polish, of course. My wife would not forgive me if I did, right? But this whole concept of how excess carbohydrates will convert into fat, will contribute to insulin resistance, it's in the book.
Yeah.
It's in the book, so that everyone. Oh, honey, I said German. She's texting me German. No, Latvian. That's it. It's in Latvian.
Beautiful.
You're right. So, all right, back to the brain. So let's talk a little about how sugar imbalances, insulin resistance can impact on brain function.
Yeah, and don't let me forget to talk about a couple simple ways to test yourself for insulin resistance too. We can talk about that in a few minutes.
Well, let's do that first, if we can.
Sure.
Because there have been a couple of questions. How do I test for this? How would I know? So let's do that one first.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, you're gonna learn here in the next few minutes that insulin resistance, even more so than diabetes, and high insulin, hyperinsulinemia, is tied very closely to brain degeneration, Alzheimer's disease, and really all forms of dementia and cognitive impairment and neurodegenerative disease. So very, very important to look at. And, there's a number of ways that you can test your own, looking at simple blood tests that you can tell if you're insulin resistant. So I use a triad of tests. Fasting insulin, which I think is important. A lot of people don't get it. It's not standard, but ask your doctor for it. Insurance companies typically will cover it. If not, it's not an expensive test, and it's well worth getting. Just really urge your doctor to order that. So fasting insulin, triglycerides, which is a part of any standard lipid panel, and high sensitivity CRP, which is an inflammation marker. There's another cytokine called TNF alpha, which is even more closely tied to insulin resistance, but most people aren't going to get that done. So high sensitivity CRP is one that is part of any good functional medicine workup, and certainly can be a good surrogate for inflammation. Not perfect, but pretty good. And you can look at those three. And if those are out of balance, if that high sensitivity CRP is above, say, 0.8, and the insulin is up above 5 or 6, certainly if it's above 10, most people would agree that's too high for fasting insulin. And then triglycerides, certainly if it's over 100, that is too high. The lab report will typically say under 150, but that's really associated more with cardiovascular risk. I think 100 is a much better number, and really we see our patients after a while will get their triglycerides down into the 50, 60, 70 range. So those three are good, but there's also some models. And Dr. Tom, I know you and I talked about the HOMA-IR score, which is a great one also. And the HOMA-IR score is, let me just grab my notebook here because I never remember these numbers,
I
But
know I need the notes for HOMA also because it's so
yeah, so
goofy.
HOMA IR is so it's your fasting insulin
Right.
multiplied by your fasting glucose, and in the U.S. we divide it by 405, so 405, and that leads to a score. Optimal is really right around 1 to maybe 1.5. Anything over 2 is considered insulin resistant. So if you're in the US, take your fasting insulin. Again, you need that test. Multiply by your fasting glucose, divided by 405. There's lots of calculators online too. You can type in it's HOMA-IR calculator, and you'll be able to punch it in. It's a little different internationally. We
Just
do
have
the
to
same
convert.
test, but divide it by 22.5, and it's the same numbers.
We will put in the notes for this Facebook Live session that formula,
Yeah.
your HOMA score. That happens to be my personal favorite to check people to see how are you doing? How's your body handling sugar right now? And because I've seen it as a great marker of insulin resistance, and now everyone knows a little about what that means. So I just want to say one more thing about insulin resistance, that insulin resistance means that the insulin's in your bloodstream, but it's unable to carry the sugar into the cell.
Right.
For whatever reason, it's unable to. And there's a couple of reasons why we may get to it, may not. But it's not able to get the sugar into the cell. So the cell is hungry for more sugar. So the cell sends a message to the brain, I need sugar, I need it now. So you make more insulin to try to carry the sugar into the cell. And thus insulin resistance means your insulin goes up in your bloodstream. So you do a blood draw and the insulin level's gone up. So the markers that Dr. Brian talked about, you want your insulin level below, what number was that, Dr. Brian?
I like to see insulin below, say, like 5 or 6 range, somewhere between 2,
Right.
2.5, and 5 or 6.
Right.
And that's something that we're always kind of looking at healthy patients and trying to figure it out, because unfortunately there's no published data on that that I've seen. But most people agree anything over 10 is certainly associated with insulin resistance.
Yes, in my practice, it's 5 to 6. I'm right with you on that. But the HOMA score, it's a great, cheap, inexpensive biomarker that fasting insulin, fasting glucose, every doctor in the world can do that. That's not an expensive test. You plug it into the formula that we'll put here with these notes. You plug it in, and if you're above 1, you got a problem.
That's right.
And so I feel fine. Well, we'll put that on your tombstone. She felt fine. Because if you have insulin resistance, you're causing more inflammation that's killing off cells. And today's topic is about those cells in your brain. So let's get back to the brain now.
All right, very good. So brain health, obviously a complex topic, and Alzheimer's disease right now, the 7th leading killer in the U.S., and supposed to drastically increase by, say, 40% over the next few decades. Very scary. There's a few stats which I think are really interesting when it comes to Alzheimer's and diabetes. The first one is that people with diabetes are twice as likely than people without diabetes to develop Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common neurodegenerative disorder. It's the most common form of dementia. Also, 40% of people with Alzheimer's disease have insulin resistance that they are aware of. Now, who knows, that number is probably much higher, but we know that at least 40% have Alzheimer's disease. So this is it's just a really strong correlation between these two disorders.
Right. But the problem is, people, when they hear what they have to do, they say, I like my cookies. Right? We'll put that on your tombstone. I like my cookies. She liked her cookies, or her pasta, or her big bowls of rice, or whatever the carbohydrates are that they were eating every single day. Way too much of. There's nothing wrong with some carbohydrates once in a while. Of course, always the good ones, ideally, never the bad ones. A gluten-free blueberry muffin once in a while, who cares? It's a pleasant treat. But the emphasis for you and your family always has to be on vegetables. Always a variety of vegetables. our friend Dr. Terry Walls, and she works with disabled veterans. They're unable to work because of PTSD, too much trauma from being over in the wars. They can't function. They're the weird ones. They can't interact with society very well. Do you know how she turns them around, and she's so successful at turning them around that the VA sent a team to see out to Iowa where she works. What the heck are you doing? Because what you're doing is working. What is it? And there's a couple things that she does with every one of these vets. The first thing is very first thing, 12 cups of vegetables a day before you eat any carbohydrates. There's not much room for pasta after 12 cups of vegetables, right? But they've got to eat 12 cups of vegetables a day first. That means breakfast and then lunch. Then maybe they'll have a little pasta at dinner or some bread at dinner. So that's just a remarkable, remarkable way to reframe someone. Give them a goal, give them a boundary to stay within. So for our listeners, I'm not going to go that hard with you, but just think of that the worst of the worst, these guys whose brains can't function very well anymore, their neurotransmitters, their nerve hormones are so out of balance, they get wired into anxiety response very easily. And sometimes it's dangerous, what happens. They turn around, they completely turn around. And there's a whole program, but the first thing in there, 12 cups of vegetables a day.
Wow. Well, that's a great recommendation. And, vegetables, you said it earlier, but this is one area that I think almost everyone agrees on, that fibrous, non-starchy vegetables really should be the basis for all of our diets,
Yes.
I heard recently that gorillas eat about 16 pounds of leaves per day. Wow. And I was looking at a bag of spinach that I had earlier. It was a pretty big bag. It was a third of a pound. I was like, wow, that's like 45 bags of spinach. That's a lot of leafy greens. So we can all do better, certainly.
But that's the Popeye syndrome, right? You do that.
You're going to get quite a bit of protein even if you eat that much. So right. It's but we can all do better and eat more vegetables. And you're right, they have a lot of fiber and they're nutrient dense. So even though they don't contain a lot of calories, you're getting you're getting saturated with calcium and magnesium and potassium and all these phytonutrients and bioflavonoids, which the body's craving. Sometimes when you're hungry and you think you want something sweet or sugary or carbohydrate, you're really just craving nutrients. And if you can fill your body first, like Dr. Wall says, with all these healthy vegetables, maybe a lot of those cravings go away. I bet they do.
That's a really good point. Really good point. In our recommendations to everyone, one of the first things I say is when you go shopping to buy your vegetables, always organic, always organic. Yep. I was on stage last weekend with Dr. Zach Bush, and he was talking about GMOs, and I had no idea the new science that's coming out. GMO foods wipe out the good flora in your gut, and they cause intestinal permeability all by themselves. And it's been hard to prove that, but they've now proven that. So the idea of organic as being a luxury, it's not. It's not. You want to stop the autoimmune process in your body, must be GMO. In the autoimmune fix, I talked about how critically important shameless plug. I talked about how critically important it was to do organic, but now it's not just important, it's a game changer that you can't have. So what do you do when you're out? It's really a tough question because restaurants don't have organic produce, and eating produce is more important than eating pasta. You got to have produce, but so you just have to keep the balance going more in the direction of organic. But when you're shopping for vegetables, one of the things I've been recommending now for a few years, buy a couple of every root vegetable that they've got. Rutabagas, turnips, parsnips, sweet potatoes, carrots, get all of them. And every day you make sure you have at least one root vegetable with your meal, always, because the root vegetables have different fibers that feed different bacteria in your gut.
Right.
And so you don't want to just eat carrots every day. Carrots are good, but not every day. So one day it's going to be parsnips, and one day it's going to be turnips. And I'll tell you how to do it. I came up with the protocol to do it. Doesn't matter what the root vegetable is. I chop it up. I dice some onions. I throw them in there together with some garlic and olive oil. That's it. It doesn't matter what root vegetable it is. They all cook, so I cut them small enough so that they cook up kind of quickly. And then, I might add some bok choy or some broccoli, and then I put peanut sauce on it or hot sauce or, whatever the flavor of the day is. But you get your root vegetables every day.
Excellent. I love that.
Yeah. So a couple of comments here. People are asking, what about fruit? So Dr. Mal, what do you say about fruit?
Well, I think unfortunately, fruit is overconsumed today by most people.
Yeah.
The recommendation of 5 to 9 servings of fruit and vegetables per day by the USDA really should be vegetables. And I think we can eat some fruit, but I think we overconsume fruit. Fruit used to be available seasonally, and now it's available year round, and it's brought in from all over the world. And unfortunately, our bodies just aren't programmed to be able to utilize the amount of sugar in those fruits year round like that. So
how many oranges? How many oranges in an 8-ounce glass of orange juice?
Geez, I don't know. 4?
How many people can eat 4 oranges at one time?
Yep.
And
if you could, it'd be a lot better because you're getting all the fiber, right? But you're not getting in the juice.
Right. Now, in terms of fruits, I'd just make a couple of comments. And one is that berries have a whole lot of nutrient power to them.
Absolutely.
Many fruits are good for you, but if you're going to choose them, if I remember correctly, it's acai, then blueberries, black raspberries, raspberries, and blackberries.
Yeah.
In that order for what's called their ORAC value, ORAC. And that means they suck up these free radicals, the damage that occurs in our cells. So having some berries, now I've been talking for years. I read a study back in the late 80s that showed that 1 cup of blueberries a day reverses cognitive decline, brain thinking decline of 13 years within 3 years. Mm-hmm. So you eat 1 cup of blueberries a day for 3 years and you're thinking as good as you were 13 years ago.
Wow.
That's blueberries. And so I buy frozen organic blueberries. I've always got 5 packs in my freezer, organic, always organic. And I'll take a cup of blueberries. I'd probably do it realistically 3 times a week. If I want something a little sweet at night, I need a little dessert, I need something, I go for the blueberries first, a cup of blueberries. I just eat them cold, frozen. And they're really tasty. They're very tasty.
Yeah, and they're low glycemic. They have more fiber than most fruits, certainly by volume. Like you said, loaded with bioflavonoids and cyanidins and antioxidants and all sorts of good stuff. So berries are really the best fruit for sure.
There's a question came in from Heather, said, what about eating its root vegetables raw? I know they're starchy, but I'm transitioning from vegan to raw vegan. And I want to say 2 things. First, what a great example that she's transitioning. When you're going to change your diet from this to that, please don't stop in one day, except going gluten and dairy free. That's fine. But on anything else, I'm going to be a vegetarian. I'm going to be a vegan, whatever. Transition. Give your body time to adapt. You've been doing this for 40 years. All of a sudden, that's it. I'm a raw food person now. Don't do that. So you transition. So kudos to you, Heather, for that concept of transitioning. And in terms of eating them raw, surprisingly, I had raw turnips. They were shaved. They were really thin and kind of curled, and they had been marinated with a little bit of balsamic vinegar, something or other like that. It was really good. It was surprisingly good. So,
and I love jicama, which is like Mexican yam. That's you can do that. Of course, you do that raw. That's great to dip in some guacamole, make your own raw guacamole, dip some jicama and carrots in there, and you got a great, healthy fat, fairly, low glycemic snack.
Agreed. Okay, let's go back to the brain a little more. and about sugar in the brain. One of the things that I wanted to address is the body considers the brain gets addicted to sugar. Can you talk about that a little bit, Dr. Bryan?
Yeah, sure. Sugar is very, very addictive. And there's been studies, of course, that have looked at sugar and carbohydrate addiction. And some report that it's as strong or stronger than drugs like morphine, heroin, cocaine, and so forth. It acts on the pleasure centers of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is where that reward cascade happens. So we have a little bit and it sets off this reaction in the brain that makes us want more. We love the feeling of it and we want more. Carbohydrates also help the body selectively use tryptophan, which leads to serotonin in the brain, increases in serotonin, which can be helpful, but it also, I think, contributes to this love of carbohydrates and sugar, and is another potential link to cravings and addictions. But sugar addiction, not only is it chemically very potent, but it's difficult to avoid once you're there because it's everywhere. Sugar, carbohydrates are everywhere. I always say, imagine if you're addicted to a drug like, let's say, cocaine, and everywhere you went, it was just out in bowls. You know, you went to work and at the front desk, there was a bowl of it, and people were walking around offering it to you constantly. And imagine how hard it would be to break that addiction. And that's the way sugar is. I mean, it's very accepted, it's everywhere, and it's a very difficult addiction to break. I've talked to people like Susan Pierce Thompson, who says that food addiction can be harder to break than drug addiction, and she knows. So this is very, very powerful. It acts on the brain. We talk about 3 different types of addictions. There's physical, chemical, and psychological addictions. And typically all 3 are involved. The physical addiction is sort of the taste of that food. It's the crunch, if it has a crunch. It's the mouth feel. And those are very strong, but short-lived. You can usually break those pretty quickly. Chemical addictions are what I was just talking about, how that actually affects the brain. And it is similar to nicotine or any other drug, morphine. It acts on the brain. And then the psychological addictions are just the love of that food. I remember growing up, those were treats for me. And so sometimes when I'm sad, depressed, stressed, I'll sort of have this, deep desire to have whatever that candy might be. And that's a psychological addiction, which are very, very difficult to break. Fortunately, they're also the weakest form of addiction, and you can overpower them with some willpower more easily than you can these chemical addictions. It takes about a month really to break through a chemical addiction, complete abstinence from that food.
One of the techniques that we talk about in dealing with these addictions to foods is to embrace the concept that base hits win the ball game. You keep just going for that base hit, which means I really want a piece of pie tonight or a donut. You know what? I'm going to try a small bowl, a cup of blueberries, frozen blueberries first. As stupid as that seems, I'm going to try that first. If it doesn't work, then I'm going to go have the donut. And that's a base hit.
Yeah.
That you're just trying. So what you want to do is set yourself up for success. And meaning have the stuff available that's better for you. So as you're transitioning into this new way of feeding your body, there'll be some days when, the heck with that. Where's the donut? Mm-hmm. Or where's that bowl of rice? It's been a rough day. I want a bowl of rice. And if that happens, that's fine. That's fine. Be kind to yourself in this process, but always know base hits win the ball game. You're just going to keep going for base hits. Keep going. And you know what? The other concept I'd say is that we've heard the phrase before, he won the battle but lost the war.
Mm.
You know, the surgery was a success, but the patient died.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So don't judge yourself by any one day or any one action, and don't beat yourself up. Just know that you're setting yourself up for success. You're pulling these little tricks of the trade that we've talked about already, the ones that are in the book and the ones that are in Dr. Mao's program that I'm going to talk about in a minute. You know, these little secrets, these little pearls that when you go for these little base hits and you go shopping and you buy those little things that are base hit things, frozen blueberries, root vegetables, all of that, and you just say, all right, I'll try this first. If it doesn't work, I want the donut.
Mm-hmm.
Then you will win the ball game. You will win the ball.
I like that. I like that. And I like how you said to be gentle with yourself, because this is a process. None of us, trust me, none of us is perfect.
Yes.
Everybody is going to falter or go off track at some point or cave to a craving. And instead of beating yourself up, you have to love yourself and just try again tomorrow. And I love that small ball analogy. It's great.
Yeah. A couple of questions came in. A couple of questions about avocados. People asking about avocados. They're a really good fat. As you're moving to get more healthy fats in your diet, we always recommend avocados. They're great for you. So don't worry about avocados now. Realistically, though, and there are some people that go off the deep end. I mean, if you drink too much water, you drown. You eat too many avocados, I imagine you turn green. No, I don't know. But, you know, be balanced, you know, just balance. Avocados are great for me. I'm going to eat 5-10 avocados a day. No, right. You're not. You don't do that. But avocados are really good for you. Someone asked about frozen cherries. Well, the idea of frozen fruit is okay. Cherries have benefits to them. There's some health benefits to cherries. Absolutely. They're not the kind of thing. I haven't seen any studies on eating cherries every day. We certainly see them for bladder infections and kidney and ureter infections.
Gout even.
Gout, right. They're great for those things. And if you Google cherries and gout, you'll see the studies. And they even talk about which type of cherry's better. And I've got the studies, but I just don't remember which ones they were, right? So cherries are okay. But in terms of brain function, what this topic today has been about, blueberries have been shown to, no question, they benefit brain function, get your 8 cylinders firing better, much better.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bryant, any last things that you'd like to bring up before we close this one out? We're supposed to be somewhere around 30 minutes. We've been 52 minutes so far,
all right.
Which is really great. I mean, I love it, you know, but for my wife, she's in Switzerland right now, and it's almost 2 a.m. So I'd like her to get to sleep.
Well, you know, I really want to just reinforce what you said when you're talking about the avocados. I think one of the problems I have with one of the current popular diets, which is the ketogenic diet right now, is that there's and there's nothing wrong with that eating strategy. It can be very effective. But there's this idea that you can eat as much as you want as long as you control the macronutrient balance. In other words, if I eat low carb and keep my carbs low enough, I can eat as much fat as I want. In fact, it's a good idea to just take a stick of butter and rub it all over my chicken breast so that I increase my fat consumption to try to drive ketogenesis. And I think that's a huge mistake, especially for people with weight problems or with insulin resistance and high insulin levels, or people trying to prevent dementia and brain disease. Overconsumption of food historically has always been a disaster. When we overconsume anything, as you said, water can do it, but you know, realistically, you know, any food group, if we overeat carbs, if we overeat protein, if we overeat fat, if we overeat anything, it's going to be associated with problems. Diabetes is a big one. Overstimulation of insulin, of course, is one which leads to high insulin and all the things that we talked about today. So Don't overeat. Now, you don't have to, count every calorie and make sure that you're staying within these guidelines. In fact, I think I think the whole calorie counting thing is a bit of a myth. I don't think it's an exact science, but I do think we need to control the amount of energy in the form of food that we put in our bodies. One good way to do that is to eat more vegetables, as we talked about earlier, because vegetables are very high in nutrients and very low in calories, or that type of energy. They're going to give you a lot of energy, but they don't have a lot of caloric energy. And then obviously you can have fats. Fats are great. Just don't purposely go out of your way to add a bunch of fats just because you think you have to. Eat sensibly and don't overeat, because when you overeat, that's no matter how good you're eating, you could be eating all organic, you could be eating all healthy, great foods, healthy fats. If you're over consuming them, typically it's still going to lead to problems.
That's brilliant and really well said. On stage last weekend in Chicago, there were a bunch of questions by the doctors afterwards. We did a Q&A with the speakers, and it was Dr. Sarah Gottfried and Zach Bush and Sarah Ballantyne and I. It was really fun. It was a lot of fun. And
great people.
Yeah. And the questions were in the line of what you were just talking about for ketogenic diets. And although the ketogenic diets have a real value for a short period of time in certain situations,
right?
They really do. Now, and some people, there's a whole movement now where people are buying these powders from a multi-level marketing company, and they're going on a ketogenic protocol, and they're losing weight and they're shedding down. But long term, it's not great for you. You can't stay there long term. So for a therapeutic protocol, ketogenic diets can work well. When most of us were first introduced to this, it was for people that had drug-resistant epilepsy.
That's right.
That the drugs weren't working. And so one researcher found when people went on a ketogenic diet, the seizures stopped. They stopped. So that was fabulous. Now, coincidental with that, there's a paper in the journal Gastroenterology showed 50% of children with drug-resistant epilepsy, 50% of them go into complete remission on a gluten-free diet. So a gluten-free diet in itself lends someone closer to ketogenesis, especially when that paper was written 15 years ago. There weren't all the great gluten-free foods that are out there now. Stuff tasted like cardboard back then, so no one wanted it. So they were staying away from more carbs and going more into ketogenesis just by being gluten-free. But what I want to say is that a ketogenic diet can be of value, but do know it's for a short period of time if you're going to do it. And too much fats is not great for you. And the way I answered the question on stage was, if you think about our ancestors, 5,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, what did they eat? They ate what they could find.
That's exactly right.
Right? And sometimes they ate a whole lot of fat because they harvested an animal and they were eating the fat of the animal and all that. But most of the time they were eating plants.
Right.
Plants and berries and seeds and maybe nuts and a few grains, but not that many. So our bodies are designed to have that kind of variety, but not an excess amount of anything, except water. We have to have water every day. Everything else, there's a philosophy I heard of from there was this very famous iridologist back in the 1980s. I had a reading with him. He read my eyes in 1972. His name was John Christopher. And he read my eyes and told me I had blue eyes. And I thought, man, this guy's high on something because I've got brown eyes, right? I don't have blue eyes. I said, well, doctor, thank you, but I don't have blue eyes. I have brown eyes. No, you've got blue eyes underneath all that crap in your body. You've got blue eyes. And I just started laughing when he said that, right? But I lost my train of thought what I was talking about with them. So I get lost sometimes there. But it's about moderation and
Yes,
the way our ancestors ate.
that's right.
Not too much excess on anything, folks. Not too much excess on anything. And with that, the last thing I want to say is that we're going to put some links here in the notes so you can go to Dr. Brian's websites and see some of the programs he has available. And you can learn more about how to deal with blood sugar stability, about diabetes. If you have any family members of diabetes, giving them the link for Dr. Brian's programs can be a great gift because they'll learn so much. You've got a few programs now out there, don't you?
Yeah, and real quickly, just want to mention the summit, which you're on again as a guest this year. It starts April 23rd, and people can register now at the diabetessummit.com. So you don't want to miss Dr. Tom's talk this year, and we've got 30 other experts talking all about insulin resistance and the brain and diabetes. Yeah. And yeah, we do have other programs for people who want to get real serious about getting their blood sugar back in line.
Now, in the Diabetes Summit, this is the second one that you.
This is, believe it or not, the fifth.
Wow.
This is the fifth. Yeah. So 2014 we started.
So you've dialed down the kinds of questions to ask of the experts, and you're really, and I remember in our interview, much more dialed in than the other times that we've done the interview.
That's probably true.
Yes, which is great. It's like, all the peripheral stuff is fine, but let's get down to business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've done enough. And a lot of people have visited every year, or at least this is maybe their second or third year. So we really do get into some really deep topics, but of course, always making them very practical. That's one thing I always try to do is allow people to leave each talk, even if they are only able to catch 3 or 4 over the course of the week, that they're going to leave with something from every single presentation.
Marvelous. And we've already put the link at the top of all the comments. So it's right there for you. You can go there and register. And if you have friends or family that have blood sugar problems or maybe even diabetes, please send them the link. Send them the link and say, hey, this event's about to happen. It's free. You should watch this thing because you're going to learn a lot about what's happening in your body. And the last thing that I would say, folks, is that if you like this stuff that we're doing here, please like us, hit the like button and share this. Share the link for this with your friends. So, because the more people that get to hear this kind of information, the more people start to turn around their health and the better the planet's going to be, right? That's why we're doing this. I mean, we're not selling anything, except shameless plug.
And Dr. Tom, I have to say that you've written really one of the best books on autoimmunity out there. It's amazing. I refer to that all the time, and your Betrayal series on autoimmunity is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's a must watch. So I'm sure most of the people watching this have seen both. Hopefully they have your book. If not, get it. It needs to be part of your library for sure.
Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you. And all right, everyone, thank you so much. We will see you next week, same time, same place.